Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TopCyberPro podcast. I'm Jim West, founder and CEO of TopCyberPro.com. Today, I got a great guest. He's part of the team of EverydaySpy. Now, if you haven't heard about EverydaySpy, I know you've seen one of their founders. He's been all over social media, which is Andrew. He's got the big hair. He recently had a haircut, so he does have shorter hair now. But you've definitely seen a clip, whether on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You've seen a clip of the co-founder of this company. And so today we have Trenton Miguez, who is part of the team at EverydaySpy, who is leading the development of the course around SkunkWorks, which we're going to get into in a minute. But without further ado, Trenton, welcome to the Top Cyber Pro podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
So, Trenton, let's get right into what is HUMINT? HUMINT. People have seen this term. I might be mispronouncing it, so correct me if I'm wrong, but give us that high level of what it is.
Yeah, so how the world of intelligence works is we have these different ints or different forms of gathering intelligence. So we have signals intelligence as a way of, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, is how do you actually collect the ones and zeros, the signals in the air, in order to identify particular pieces of data or information that would be relevant to a mission. Now, HUMINT is the human version of what that would be. So, how you would intercept different codes or radio signals or different capacities in different ways for computer systems or computer architectures or anything like that. It's the human version of it. So, a lot of people misunderstand what human is or human intelligence. They think it's the secret that's going to unlock everything. But the value that human intelligence really provides isn't so much as any single piece of information, but what it does provide you is a understanding of intent that no other piece of intelligence actually is able to provide you. Because truly to understand intent, you have to ask another person what's going on in their brain, right? So that's really where the value of human intelligence comes in. And spies or military members that are specifically trained in HUMINT is specifically trained to elicit that sort of information to uncover someone's intent.
And it sounds kind of on the surface not too far varied from like what news reporters do because they have sources, information, contacts, etc. as well. And so it seems very, very similar. It seems like it could be like almost parallel lanes, if you will.
Yes, and I would attribute that is a close representation for I guess the average person to say, oh, it's sort of like this. Yes, and I would say that's fairly accurate to say. The big distinction there, compared to modern sources of information versus actual journalistic standards are extremely rigorous. You have to validate specific sources. Where did they get their information? You have to corroborate that information independently from various different sources. So, journalistic standards, a journalist, is very, very similar to how the human intelligence world works. We have a set standard that is independently verified not only by the humanter, but also by a person called an all source intelligence analyst that
Mhm.
actually takes that human source information and compares it and corroborates it with a variety of different types of sources, also being SIGINT and GEOINT or geospatial intelligence, imagery intelligence, and able to look at that full picture. If you ever saw a meme with the crazy guy staring at the wall with a whole bunch of
Yeah, with all
red
the yeah.
porn, right? That is the all source analyst. They also have those nested within human intelligence cells. And it goes, I'm going to say, in breadth and in depth at many different levels, but that's the gist of it. Yeah.
Okay. And what's really interesting is when we first engaged Everyday Spy for this podcast, it was like, I already see the intersection, right? When we talk about human intelligence and then like cyber threat intelligence. I think, the terminology is largely the same when we talk about how threat actors work in the digital realm as how they work in the real world. These methods have been cultivated over centuries, right? That, with some advanced techniques being leveraged through technology, right? But when we talk about, psychology, which a lot of this is rooted in human behavior psychology, it goes back, hundreds, if not thousands of years, all the way to like Art of War and even predating Art of War from Sun Tzu, and how these organizations and agencies have leveraged all of this to their maximum benefit, right? And so, with that being said, let's talk about that convergence, right? What are the similarities that you see between like human intelligence and human threat actors to cyber actors into the cyber threat intelligence field?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think a clear similarity is that every system is exploitable. There's no system that is invulnerable,
Yes.
right? And there is always a weak point inside of that system, and that system's weak point is usually people's emotions,
Mhm.
right? From how someone might code a certain bias into their programming, or they will have oversight of something else because they're stressed out. They have priorities in where do they put their attention to repair certain vulnerabilities versus enhancing certain security in other places within that vulnerability structure, right? To reduce that threat vector. There will always be a point of vulnerability. And if you understand that point of vulnerability based upon that person's stresses and their priorities, what we call pain points, then it becomes very apparent that every person and every system has that pain point that is easily exploitable.
And I recently listened to some talks from people that talked about, the human operating system, right? Like you said, finding the vulnerability for an individual, whether it's a financial vulnerability, family, personal relationships, or somewhere. Everybody has their weak spots, right?
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't know, and for your cyber professionals watching this podcast right now, is that the majority of successful cyber attacks start with human exploitation, not the technology exploitation. And this is really interesting because I'll cite some recent cases because I know some people are going, no, that's not true. This is very true. Social engineering is still very well and alive today. I know Kevin Metnick was the world's first famous hacker. He social engineered the Shimura Corp. But here's the thing: MGM Casino. When we think of casinos, we think of the Ocean's Eleven's movies with this elaborate, complex cybersecurity teams and physical security teams that run. And they got cameras everywhere. Well, we would consider the top like 1% of security programs on the planet. You would think the casinos have that because they're protecting lots of money, protecting the operations, as well as, again, they have the budget to be able to employ some of the best in class technologies as well as professionals to support the security of their organization. But MGM famously a couple years ago got social engineered through LinkedIn, folks. And a couple of the privileged level users gave up their administrator accounts, and the next thing you know, that was the keys to the kingdom, and they had lost lots and lots of money. And that's a recent example I could point to. But there are countless examples where it's through the humans, whether they click the bad link, and then they have a ransomware attack. A lot of school board districts had this issue happen a few years ago. I know Louisiana was one of the states that got massive amounts of their networks were ransomware simply because people clicked the link, and that's still a form of exploiting human behavior, right? Whether it's curiosity, whether it's urgency, or whatever tactic that's being used to elicit the action from the human. So, with that being said, when it just comes, let's just focus just down to social engineering. How could taking courses and information from Everyday Spy help even a 10 plus year cyber professional be better at helping share knowledge in his organization to prevent social engineering type of attacks?
Yeah, so I'll first start off saying you're an expert in something, right? Everyone is well, I wouldn't say everyone. Majority of professionals are experts in one particular field. So what you see is, especially on the thing that you just mentioned, those people were able to be exploited because they weren't experts in social engineering. They weren't experts in social dynamics or psychological leverage, right? That's exactly what we teach inside of Everyday Spy. We teach how does the human brain work depending on class, sexuality, and whether or not it's a cultural indoctrination. If you live in the South versus you live in the North, or you live in
Yes.
America versus you live in Mumbai, right? How you perceive the world and how your brain is going to work is actually very, very predictable. And it's not hard to do once you get a little bit of practice to do it with, right? Once you get a little bit of practice and you understand how the human brain actually works and you start paying attention to what matters, you don't need to read 30, 50, 100 different social engineering books in order for you to figure this out. What you really need to be able to do is understand a few models that is going to work across cultures, across ages, across sex and different perceptions, right? If you're able to lean into those specific models that we teach at Everyday Spy, models that CIA case officers use, famous intelligence organizations that use, as well as military, right? Those things, if you lean into them, it's very easy to understand what you should be paying attention to and how do you actually leverage that to your own benefit.
Oh, well said. Well, let's talk about one of the courses that you help, refine and build with the Everyday Spy. It's called the SkunkWorks program. So, could you tell me a little bit about what is this program? What can someone expect to learn in this program?
Yeah, so I used to create different lessons as well as entire courses for the United States military, the Army's Military Intelligence Corps. I taught or I should say, I constructed the current collections program as well as the intelligence officers program. I took what I learned from that organization, and I took what I learned from the private sector and SkunkWorks, working with Andrew Bustamante. We developed a exclusive program for civilians that teach the same intelligence techniques, practices, and spy education that is affordable, right? Affordable at various different levels based upon what you want to achieve, where you can break barriers in your personal relationship, you can break barriers in your professional relationships, as well as breaking barriers in your own personal wealth and health. And SkunkWorks is the core of that, where we teach at a recruit level very much foundational concepts that if you think you have social skills or you don't have any social skills, entering at a recruit level gives you that baseline of how much you actually really don't know about human psychology and how to actually leverage human psychology in your relationships. At the operator level, we take that to a whole new level in both breadth and depth, how to understand the mechanisms that are at play and how to create your own structures to engage those relationships. And then we have an exclusive in-person elite level as well that is exclusive to meeting one-on-one and in group settings, private education at the elite level with intelligence officers, those who are still in the world, and also those who are working in private intelligence, as well as myself and Andrew Bustamante.
Well, it sounds super exciting. And for folks watching that might be like, well, I don't know if this is quite a fit for me. Think about it this way. If you are a lead or manager, director, program manager, or any type of person that's in charge of a team of people, right? One of the key things in this course that I've written down here was about influence, persuasion, and behavioral detection. What better thing for a manager or lead or program manager, or any of those titles I just mentioned, and anywhere in between, to be able to know when you have a team member that might be struggling, be able to detect that faster, be able to help before that team member has either burnout or decides to just up and quit due to the pressure of the job, right? Or you'd be able to elicit better performance from your teams. Who wouldn't want a higher performing, higher output, higher capacity team? So these are things that will help you be better at that, because not all managers, and I know everyone watching this right now can name easily two or three bad managers they've had in their career. But just imagine if all managers and all people in positions of authority had this coursework and this education information, how much more effective you could be as a leader. But then on a personal level, when you mention relationships, it's not just your work and business relationships. It could be even in your personal life, right? Being able to take control more of your personal life is something that a lot of us we idolize and we wish we could be when we see like you watch these shows like The Night Agent or other shows that have an operator, right? And we see how these guys work. They work at very high stress, high tempo, where every second counts, right? And they got to make on the spot decisions. We all idolize these folks like James Bond, probably the most unsuccessful, famous spy in the world because everybody knows him, right? But the point being is we all idolize these figures because they're in charge, they're in control, they know how to make that rapid split second decision, and they're often more right than wrong, right? And that's something that everyone on the planet wishes that we could be more like. So, with that being said, there's some things that I've noted from the program. It talks about intel gathering and analysis that I think that are beneficial to cyber professionals. Situational awareness, threat detection. I think everybody could be better at that. Human behavior profiling, risk assessment, but then the big one here is influence, persuasion, and behavioral detection. So with just those components, how much of a game changer is that for any professional to get?
Yeah, so I try to attribute this to, imagine if you're in a foreign country and you don't speak the language. How well would you be able to go to the grocery store, buy what you need to buy, travel across the city and rent an apartment or something like that. It would be probably pretty difficult, right?
Hmm.
That is the average American. That
Yes.
is the average person in terms of social understanding on how other people's brains work, right? They attribute and they project so much of their own personal beliefs, their own experiences into the other person, and they try to match and make sense of the world as they understand it, not as what reality sort of dictates, right? And so all of the things that we teach inside of SkunkWorks is, yes, absolutely persuasion, influence, but what it really comes down to is understanding the mechanisms that are actually at play in someone's psyche, so you know how that person is going to actually perceive what you are saying, how they're going to perceive it, in what context, how they're going to process that information, and then how they're actually going to conclude and make a decision. And then whether or not that decision is emotionally fueled or if it's logically fueled. And in both cases, you'll know how to create a certain plan that drives their behavior to a certain action that is both productive and constructive for both of you.
Hmm. And we see this a lot when we hear these stories of the clueless American traveler that gets a mugging, or petty crime as we call it. But that'll happen quite frequently because they're projecting their worldview of what they think, that everyone's good natured, that everyone is there to be of assistance, and just because we're Americans, that we're well loved around the world, they don't really understand the reality in a lot of places. Or even if you're in a place that's a high tourism place, there are still elements of people that do not like our values, our way of life, etc. And so, having
Mm.
that vigilance is the word I'll probably use in this moment, in that context. They tend to let their guards down because they feel like they're safer because there's people around, and they don't understand that mob mentality is very real, right? We see that with like world star hip hop, with everybody that whips out their phones. No one really is going to be there to lend a hand. So you got to be looking out for you. And so I think that just for people, that anyone that ever travels anywhere, just taking a course just for that alone, learning how to be more aware of your surroundings, be able to detect threats before they materialize into real world threats. Because what you said about projecting your worldview, that's what happens when people are on the, when, if they're still alive, they're on their news saying, "I never thought this would ever happen to me." No one ever thinks they're going to be a victim, right? Until it happens, because their
Yeah.
worldview gets crashed in on by reality. So I think that's a very powerful statement you read right there, because how you project what you think of the world is everything until you're told otherwise by someone else's
Yeah.
projection of the world, right?
Yeah. I would say, just to lean into that a little bit more, every person is going to have an innate bias, and because of their own how their brain works, will have a distortion, right? Because of that inherent bias that they have. You can't really get rid of them. However, you can mitigate them by being aware of them, right? And so, just to prove my point here, sort of, I like to do this with audiences sometimes, and your audience is very cyber focused, right? So I would ask, everyone here is probably thinking of security. They're thinking of maybe VPNs, or their front and in back end game, right, in their network structure. They might even take it a step further based upon their education level, right, or their experiences. They might be thinking about physical security as well, right? Maybe having some reflective glass where you can't see inside of a building, or they might think about a particular set of locks and structures of different kinds of style of locks, or how their place is actually structured in order to move around more efficiently if you're under threat. Maybe you have security cameras both on Wi-Fi and hardlined, right? That is what you're thinking about. But I can guarantee at least one of you right now aren't probably thinking about that hairy guy that is sort of rude, kind of a dick, but you also kind of like him because he's speaking truth to you, and he shares the same empathetic value of that asshole boss that you currently have, right? You're not thinking about that guy is actually building rapport with you that's going to use what you confide in him to his advantage, right? And that is the distortion that we see in the cyber world, is that people focus on social engineering, but what they really don't focus on is counterintelligence, right? How to prevent someone else targeting a hunter, right? You being the hunter.
Oh yeah,
So
especially when
just
you look.
there is yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned the hairy guy. Years ago, I helped a friend of mine who was having a challenge at a major oil and gas company in the Houston area, and they brought in a top tier firewall analyst from a very big company. I'm not going to drop their name, but they're one of the top in the world at it. So they were paying top dollar to. They suspected they had a data breach, and so of intellectual property. And so, long story short, we were going to lunch, but he is, talking about how these guys have been there almost a week and hadn't found any evidence of this. And so I said, well, let's go back into your office. Let's backtrace because people just saw me walking with you. Let's just see how far I can get into your office. And within just, I did a piggyback on one person. And next thing you know, I'm in the hall. I go into an area where his admins are and ask, hey, I need to get to the server and look at some logs. And they just assumed since they saw me with their boss earlier that, oh, I'm supposed to be there. Didn't challenge me for credentials or anything. Get walked into the server room. They pulled out the server tray to say, do you need me to log in for you? I said, no. And then he walked in and says, I got it from here. And it quickly showed him just with just just acting like I belong, acting the role. Of course, I look like I'm supposed to be there, and then I do cyber, right? And so that all helps, right? Because people mistake in the films and movies when we think that's the killer, the guy that got the weird-looking face that sticks out. They always think that's going to be that easy to identify the threat. You know, no axe murderer just walks into the bar screaming his head off. That doesn't always start like that. It always ends up being the most normal-looking person that blends into the environment, and that's why it's so surprising to us when it happens, right? And also our not being fully aware, right? Our alarms and our sensors aren't being fully activated because we haven't been trained on how to activate those type of sensors and to kind of, vet out what's not right in our environment. But what I want to go into this is what would surprise people to know about real world human operations, right? Because we hear it, we're like, okay, we get it. I mentioned earlier the analogy to like journalism and so forth. But in that world of operation, what are some things that would surprise people? Because when we think of that, we think of like clandestine services and trying to flip a contact or have someone go against their nation or so forth. We think of that. That's what Hollywood stylizes. But what could you give us that would surprise us?
Yeah, I think one of the most surprising thing whenever I started getting into the world of human intelligence is how well you need to focus on building your nutrition, your sleep patterns, and your own cognitive functions. A lot of people see the cool, sexy thing that they see in Hollywood where this person slips you some information or you have a conversation and he said something that he wasn't supposed to say, but he did so anyways, right? And that goes into a report and that kind of changes the whole dynamic of what's happening. And that's a really good sexy stuff. But the boring stuff that no one really talks about that is surprising, or at least it was surprising to me, how much work a average human intelligence professional has to put into maintaining their own cognitive functions. Because if you're at 50% brain capacity, right, and whatever that means, meaning processing speed, memory, retention, all of that, if you're only at 50% and you're having to elicit information from this person and you're using very delicate and sophisticated techniques, meaning I'm going to have a conversation with him about what he believes and make him think or her think what they're saying might only be 1% of what I need. But over the course of the conversation, I'll get 50% of what I need through different conversational methods, right? But unless I figure out a way where I can remember all of that and also understanding how that person's currently perceiving that conversation
All in
and
real time.
everything in between that in real time, it becomes very taxing on your cognitive functions. And so a lot of work goes into not only preparing yourself, but training your own brain to perform in those moments. And it's very sophisticated work, but it's surprisingly simple in order to prepare yourself for that sophisticated work.
I can only imagine if it's a spy and another spy trying to elicit information on each other, how both parties have to be at that top, almost near 100% of their cognitive capacity and leveraging every technique and tactic to kind of almost like a chess game, if you will, is the way I would probably visualize it. That's surprising to know. Obviously, we all talk about how important sleep is, right, for our overall health, no matter what career we're in, and to hear that it's ultimate and paramount into the spycraft game is very interesting to hear that. So, but folks, if you're cyber predators, don't burn yourselves out. Get your sleep. sleep, regardless of what profession you're in. But that was really enlightening. Um, what are some of the biggest OPSEC mistakes? And when we say OPSEC, operational security, for those that are watching that don't want to do the Google search real quick, what are the biggest OPSEC mistakes professionals make online without even realizing it?
Ooh, that's a good question. The biggest mistake that professionals make online. I was about to say the non-online version, which is talking with friends or family about the work. That was going to be I would say the biggest mistake, that they trust someone, and that trust in that communication is in fact a violation because that other person isn't trained the way that you're trained. And so that is usually human leaks. As far as online, um, see if I could recall the three biggest, or I'll say this: the most common and then the most severe, right? I'd say the most common is someone making a social media post
Hmm.
with something in the background.
Hmm.
That's the most common because they're just so unaware that what's in the background is even secure or supposed to be secure because it's so commonplace for them, right? That would be the most common. The most severe, I think, is when they're trying to communicate through pride, and they'll say something that they think has been cleared, and it is technically cleared for classified environments or your day-to-day that you'll work with other people, but it's not cleared for public notice. It just because it's cleared for everyone in the space that you have conversations about every single day, you get complacent on your standards,
Hmm.
and they'll say something like on LinkedIn, they'll post something on LinkedIn as a qualifying credential, but that credential alludes to, maybe not directly, but indirectly, things that are still maybe classified or things that are actually quite important whenever you look at different professionals in that same space. You can put a picture together, and that's where severe leaks come from.
You know, that's a great point because I work in the Middle East. So I'm in Kuwait. And obviously, with the war in Iran, there's a lot of operations, various intelligence sources, and so forth. And what people have to be reminded of constantly, not just with the OPSEC stuff, but when they see something online, like, oh, I see it there, I can go ahead and post about it because I just saw it somewhere else publicly on the internet. And they don't
Yeah.
understand that information can still be classified, right? And once you post about it, you're actually essentially vetting that information as valid, right? You're validating that information, making it easier for all of the intelligence agencies out there to do what they will with that information once you've essentially said it's true. So you got to be very diligent for folks that work in the defense sector of what you talk about, what you post. You know, when you mention LinkedIn, there's a lot of folks that want to give their opinions on the war and their analysis and so forth. And don't get me wrong, if it's truly OSINT information, open source information, as long as it's not been deemed classified in any organization space, it's all fair game, right? But again, there's a lot of people in the defense sector that should be a little bit more diligent. So that's some great guidance there. But with that, what are some lessons from military intelligence tradecraft that CISOs and other cyber executives should adopt immediately?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And I don't want you to give away all the secrets and great information they're going to learn for taking the course, but if you give us like one little tip or a little I guess a breadcrumb, if you will.
Yeah, specifically for social media intelligence.
Yes, and as it relates to
Or
CISOs, as they're, because they advise their executive team as well as how they should treat their social medias, because a lot of executives need that social media training as well, right?
yeah, yeah, I would say for executives, don't run your own social media. You have 1,000 other things that you need to take care of, that you're looking at what's your time and your money worth. You can outsource that, and you can make that person vet through your security procedures, right? And you can have another person look at that and vet that information before it goes out there, right? So that's a tool for executives to pull in more money or make more deals, right? And if there's something that should be brought to your attention, have that person essentially run through a checklist if it's qualifying for your time and money, right? You should not necessarily needing to be on any social medias directly. Outsource all of those things and allow your own brain to have the space to figure out how you should be getting ahead instead of dealing with the moment opportunities. Have someone else vet those opportunities for you.
Very good advice, because how many folks have made and broke their careers over a tweet or a post, and yeah, a lot of victims of just that in that moment doing something they shouldn't have did.
To
So
include our current administration.
to include, yes, no matter which side of the aisle you're on there.
Exactly.
So Trenton, let's go back. This is my favorite question for all my guests. So my favorite question is, if we could go back to your day one, the day you made the decision that you wanted to go into intelligence operations and that Intel was the world you wanted to, what I say, jump in the pool with. Is there a story there that you could share with us?
Yeah, so I have two stories there. The first story was me joining the military in the first place. I mean, if anyone has ever lived out just in a shithole of a place and has grown up in anything that is, I'm going to say, less than middle class, right? Or even upper middle class, you realize that your friends, your network, the people who you depend on aren't actually dependable. And the only way you're going to get out of a hole is through your own education and through an opportunity that might become available to you.
Hmm.
What they don't think about is creating their own opportunities to get them out of that own space. And so before I realized that when I was 17 years old, I realized, hey, I need to get out of the space that I'm in and I need better education. I need better opportunity. And the only opportunities that are currently available to me was the military. And so that's why I decided to join in the military in whatever the hell job or role that they said I can qualify for. It is one step closer to whatever is in front of me and one step away from wherever I'm currently at. And that was my mindset back then. But the second story is whenever an opportunity calls, you have a life decision to make, right? In every opportunity. But what people don't realize is when you can create your own opportunities, and creating opportunities isn't necessarily just understanding what's at play, but understanding the systems well enough, right? Everyone talks about being outside of the box and being the most creative whenever they forget that there's a box that you should learn first, right?
Hmm.
You should learn where the actual parameters of the box so you can go all the way up to that line and figure out where the creative portion is to modify that box to your advantage. And that was whenever I transitioned from an enlisted member to becoming an officer, when I realized you can take advantage of existing systems, but in order to access those existing systems, you might need a path or a stepping stone in order to enter that next system.
Well, well said. So let's talk about along your career's journey thus far. That had to have been either coworkers, colleagues, directors, managers, or just mentors or people that you admired in the space that you looked up to. So the goal of this question is kind of like that Oscars acceptance speech. You're not going to have enough time to, of course, name everyone. And it's not meant to be name dropping session, but it's meant to be more of a paying homage to the people that had a positive impact on your journey and your career so far. So is there some names that you want to shine a light on?
So I won't say by name because majority of these people are still active because they're those diehard individuals who are still working in the classified realm. But I will say there's two very specific leaders out there. One who has been a an atonement of what humility and um, just a personal being who really cares by leading through not necessarily self-sacrifice, but willing to lead by example through personal humility and a servant style leadership. That person taught me so much about what it means to put others first within an organization, and that dramatically changes an organization. And secondly, this other person, he's now a senior commander in the military. He taught me something so specific that what he used to say every time is as long as you're with an organization, you know when to leave that organization when you can no longer provide organization of value to that organization. But I didn't necessarily agree with that, but he made me think, what does it mean to whenever it's time to hang up your hat? So for all those people who are retiring or willing to change that role and step into a new line of work, it made me reflect on how do we view things in the world of intelligence. And that means when your life and your interest on what you want to get out of life no longer aligns with the organizations that you are essentially sacrificing your time, your energy, and even your money to those organizations. When those things are no longer aligned, it might be time for you to think about a new line of opportunities that you can create for yourself, where what you want to get out of life, your interests, are in line with some other organization that's willing to make you also happy and money and thrive in those new environments. Because so long, so many people, whether it be having kids or a mortgage or anything else, they're thinking about how can I just survive to the next month or the next year. They're not necessarily thinking about how can I change that view into how can I thrive in this world? And that's what he really taught me, is understand how you can frame things in order to not necessarily just survive, but thrive in a surviving world.
What a powerful perspective, and thanks for sharing that with everyone watching. Um, my next segment of this podcast is kind of what I call my moment of levity. It's meant to be fun, to take a break from all the tech talk. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions. There's no right or wrong answer, just the first thing that pops in
Let's
your
do
head,
it.
just blurt it out, and which might not be good for someone that's educated in spycraft, but let's give it a go here. All right, so I'm going to hit you with a softball. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes.
Hot dog is a sandwich. You heard it there. Cake or pie?
Pie.
What kind of pie?
Chicken pot pie.
Chicken pot pie. Okay. And I don't even have to ask hot or cold chicken pot pie. There's only one way to eat it, right? Hot. So, uh, so this is going to split the room for tech people. So Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh man. That's gonna piss off a lot of people. GE too, if you know who I'm talking about. Star Wars.
Star Wars. And what's your favorite trilogy of all the different trilogies?
So I always get messed up with the numbers, but the very first one,
With
not number one, but the first one. Yeah, I think
okay,
that was
so New
technically
Hope,
episode
is that the
three
one
or
with
something.
Luke, Leia, and Han Solo?
Yeah,
Okay. Well, what's your favorite character?
Anakin for sure.
Anakin. Awesome. And
Yeah,
then what has been your most favorite book of all time, and what was the last book that you've read?
favorite book of all time is the Bible. I know that's
Good
is
answer.
old school, but there's so much wisdom in Proverbs that I think if you haven't ever read it and you're not even a person of faith or any faith, or you might have contradictory faith, I would just say go take a look through Proverbs, and you're gonna just realize how much wisdom you can obtain just from a book.
Yeah.
Um, and I think my most recent was Vigilance is Not Enough, and it's a book that I'm currently reading for intelligence.
Excellent. Well, if you provide me the link for that book, I'll definitely put it in the description below. And folks, the
Yeah.
Bible is still, I think, the number one most printed book of all time and the number one best-selling book around the world. So, hey, a great answer there. So a lot of us are busy in our day jobs, right? We're super busy. You know, you're developing coursework, you're an instructor, mentor, etc. There's so many titles that you have behind your name. But a lot of us make time, whether we give of our time, our energy, or our own money to support what I call charities, volunteer organizations, nonprofits that are doing positive, great work in the world. So, is there such an organization that you would like to talk about and maybe what I call shine a light on the work that they're doing in the world?
Yeah, I think and this might be because I'm always in the world of intelligence, and there's so many different corporations. But one of which is A21, if you ever heard of it. A21 is one of those many organizations out there that really put a lot of effort into child and human trafficking and countering that. So they do some really good work. I worked with them in the past. Very brilliant people. In fact, there's a lot of options that are available for the world of OSINT or the world of cybersecurity, that they're looking for people like you who have a very particular skills that leverage it against people who are willing to sell other human beings, even within the United States. Another one is the Intelligence Consortium. This is one that most people don't know about. So if you ever are in the world of intelligence, highly recommend looking into these individuals. Think of TED Talks, but in the world of intelligence at an
Mm.
unclassified and classified level. And it's available for anyone in the world of intelligence or not in the world of intelligence on how can we actually move forward in developing intelligence craft and what it means in this modern world. So I find it a very intuitive yet very confusing and frustrating world, especially in the world of intelligence.
You know, you brought up human trafficking as one of the greatest evils that exists in our world, right? And a lot of times we don't hear enough about it because I think it's kind of twofold. It's not a feel-good story, right? It makes us really have to face the monsters in our world, right? But yet it exists, it's very real. And every time you hear about, a humanitarian award given out, there's some of these world leaders, I'm not going to name any countries, but there'll be leaders getting a UN humanitarian award, and they're like number 7 on the human trafficking list. And it starts to make you really question how our world operates. When you talked earlier about the box, how the systems operate, it's kind of gets real crazy when you start to really look beyond just the surface of headlines and things. But for folks that are watching right now, there's been a lot of focus on AI. So coming back into the world of spycraft, intelligence, tradecraft, etc. AI. I've had a friend recently who is he's a local radio morning show host in a small town in Louisiana, and it was his wife's mother, is the grandmother of their son, got a call from him, and it sounded just like him, carried on a conversation like him, and was basically trying to say the family was going through some financial duress, and if she could send him some money because he's embarrassed to ask his parents for any money. She almost sent the money, right? But then she made the call to kind of check in on the adults in the situation and found out no, everything's fine. But then, the son did not make that call. So it was very scary because one, it was, he shared some details that was only in the inner circle of the family, immediate family. So that it kind of lends credence to it could have been someone that's close to the family. But like you said earlier, sometimes when we talk with family members and friends, maybe we overshare information that we shouldn't have shared because, not many people are good at compartmentalizing information, right? Just because you might have been in a discussion with this family, you going over and talking to some friends, and now that friend who could be not a very good moral person is now leveraging that information into a AI-enabled attack to extort money out of the family. That's very despicable in and of itself. But that's in a small town in Louisiana. If it's happening there, obviously it's happening, a thousandfold in major cities and places around the world. So with that being said, where is your perspective of how AI is enabling threat actors to be more effective? And what are things that people can learn from the courses at Everyday Spy to help them mitigate those risks?
Yeah, so we teach personal security in a variety of different ways, and this is one of the things that we talk about here. Um, I would say first and foremost, especially the people in your audience need to understand is technology increases so fast that I'm sure all of you understand at the rate that it is currently processing, right? Exponentially fast. But understand that it's always a human behind that technology, and humans don't change, right? So no matter how good our technology is going to get, there's always going to be a human that is processing that information and making decisions. So really, the volume and pace problem, the pace of information or the pace in which technology is increasing, it is funneled or it is constricted by human processing, right? So because humans always process things, if you can understand the gateways to human psychology, meaning the gateway on them saying yes or moving towards a decision and coming to a conclusion, you can set up particular security gates in your own psyche, in your own processes that allow you to press pause and evaluate. It's just like the story that you just talked about, but there's so many people who are untrained to even realize that what the problems are. They don't understand how to actually implement any sort of security gate, right? So I think one of the one of the largest issues that people will come and bring to us on the private chats or emails or anything else like that is that they come to us and they ask questions on how can we actually feel safe. That's really what the core comes down to, right? How can you feel safe? Well, it's not turning off your social medias or not picking up the phone because or not going on podcasts because your vocals and your face is just going to be taking advantage of and being repurposed and targeted towards your family. But it's something as simple as the world of human intelligence, how can you set up a challenge and a password, right? Something so simple that we've made so complex and we're forgetting the simplicity of simply, hey, if I know just you as a security professional, there's something that we call controlled disclosure, right? Controlled disclosure means if this information meets certain requirements, I will only share it with these particular amount of people. If this kind of information meets these sort of conditions or requirements, I can share it with this larger group of people versus what I'll publicly discuss. So what you'll never hear me say is names, right? That's a line that I personally drew. If any names come to anyone in my family referring to another name that I specifically said, it will always be met with a challenge. And that person, on whoever they are, has to stay and say a password. Otherwise, there's a essential security measures that we'll take, right? And that's across my entire family and friends. And they know I'm a little bit paranoid, but for good reason because I explain them all of these measures. So there's definitely a lot of advancements, but what we really forget is that the true tried and true measurements and techniques still work in the world of human intelligence.
You said the word security gates earlier, and the immediate visual I got was the movie Inception, where they talk about how executives have to have particular training, and again, going back to Everyday Spies training courses, to train your brain to be able to detect when it's trying to be infiltrated, to be able to catch the flags and be able to sense this and be able to prevent it. And there it is right there. They're basically doing Inception training, guys. So to kind of give that great visual parallel. But the other thing you was talking about the catchphrase or the code word, right? So when this friend of mine told me about this situation that happened with the grandmother and his son, I immediately I did a couple little cyber spots for his morning show to share with his local listeners there. And on that particular episode, I said, look, every parent, and so every folk watching, anyone watching this podcast right now, if you're a parent or if you got family members you care about, this is what I say. You got to prepare for the things beforehand. Preparation, they say, preparation a pound, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? That's the old adage, right? But here's the thing: you got to run this your own family's kind of version of incident response plan. We used to talk back in the day about having fire drills in your home, like where do your kids and family go when a fire happens? You got to practice these things because practice is perfect practice makes perfect, right? So you got to sit down sometimes, even if it's a tabletop with your family. But here's the most crucial thing I advise all parents to do: is come up with not just one code word, you need two, and I'll tell you why it's important. You need one word to authenticate who that child is not an AI or some voice clone app or etc. That it is indeed your child. So, for example, the example I used on the episode was, let's say you've never been to Oklahoma, but the code word with your kid to let them know to authenticate who they are is they mention, hey, remember that time we went to Oklahoma, Dad or Mom? Boom, you already know that that's your kid you're talking to because there's no other context to use that word. So it cannot be a common word, a word that your family speaks. It has to be a unique word, preferably to something that doesn't exist, but yet it's true. People think it has to be a shared secret. The problem is the secrets, you don't know who they're talking to or another family member talks to, and they could perhaps guess it. So it has to be something completely out of the lexicon of your family history. So that's why I use Oklahoma, that one example. Use a word that is not a shared secret of a past memory experience that completely doesn't exist, but that lets you know that authenticates them. The second word is the word for when they're under duress. And what people don't understand is in the context of a child, when they're with another authority figure, it could be a teacher, an adult, a family friend. Bad things always happen because of people that we trust in our circles. But when the kid starts to feel uneasy, uncomfortable, and they make that one, it could be the last time you hear your child, they have an opportunity to communicate with you secretly that they're under duress. They don't feel comfortable. And then it can light up the senses for you to go, you're responsible. Oh, so where are you at right now? So that you can start trying to get to your child as quickly as possible. So you got to have two words: one to authenticate that they are who they are, and another word for duress. And I advise that to any parents, anyone watching right now, sit down and have these discussions. Run tabletop drills because as many scenarios you could think of. Use a GPT, ChatGPT, Grok, or any of your favorite AI GPTs to help you come up with scenarios to practice with your kids. Because until you're in the moment, How do you make that split second decision when you haven't been trained, you haven't been prepared, and you haven't run that tabletop exercise to get conditioned? Is really what it's about. When we talk about Everyday Spy, they're conditioning, training you so that you can be conditioned to respond to these real world things that happen. You mentioned human trafficking earlier. America is no stranger to human trafficking. Is very well in life. We hear these social media posts and videos and news stories about how women are taken in shopping center parking lots, right? Mall parking garages. These are all places where we think we're safe because we're bringing our groceries in. We like to think cars and people around us are going to protect us. Again, that perspective, you're projecting out that you think your world is super safe, right? Until you become the victim, right? And that's where you got to be prepared for that moment. And preparation starts now, folks. It's not about, oh, I'll do it later. It's today, right now. I always tell people when you know something, like you just been informed, Trenton's giving you a wealth of information just on this call today. And just with his perspectives and insights, now you know something. Now you can't unknow it. Now it's a moment where you have to take action on what you've learned. Is it something you're going to ingest and then take it to the next level, or are you just going to go ahead and cast it aside until worst case scenario? And I don't wish this on anyone. You become a victim, and that's something I definitely want to wish on anyone. But arm yourself with knowledge and information. Do the training and the conditioning it takes to be aware of when these things are happening. So, Trenton, we're getting up to our hour there, and I want to respect your time. And you're not prepared for this last question, but this last question is it's really not a question, but it's the last word. All my guests this season, I've given them the last word, and it wasn't on the agenda of questions you were sent. So I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot. You could talk about Everyday Spy. You could talk about intelligence tradecraft. You could talk about your favorite cuisine, favorite country to visit, favorite color of the rainbow. It doesn't matter what you want to talk about. The final word is yours.
Yeah, I think specifically for your audience, and I'm going to give this exclusively to your audience here. I think a lot of people are tending to say, for example, here where you mentioned human trafficking, everyone is culturally integrated into believing what is culturally popular, right? So I think even your language sort of painted the picture that their son or their daughter might get taken, right? And that's what comes to mind whenever you hear that. But the reality of intelligence, the reality of the tragedies in life, like your daughter getting human trafficked, what does it actually look like is very different from what is publicly displayed and culturally known. What it really looks like is befriending someone. What it really looks like is making them feel good. What it really looks like is being a confidant to their emotions or stresses, talking about their pains, their wants, their desires, or even their own broken pride, right? And having that sort of trust built with someone whom only your child knows becomes a threat vector that you have not even perceived, right? And so it's not so much about protecting to what you know, but I would say the biggest thing that is really important for all of you out there in the security world is what we call inside the world of intelligence, and I try to train everyone here inside SkunkWorks, inside of EverydaySpy, is there are active threats. You just happen to be in the threat pool that fits their criteria. So if someone who is in the threat pool of cybersecurity, they're probably not targeting you, but they might target you or your children because the access that you have. And that threat vector means that they are untrained, that they are looking at what exactly what I just said. Instead of a human trafficker, it might be an adversary that is privately hired with no moral character, right? That is looking to exploit your friends, your family, your children. And unless you have the training to train them, because now you are trained from what we talked about, are you going to do the next thing? And if you're worried about how you might do that, look me up. I'm going to have a free conversation with you. Talk to you right here with Jim. Reach out to him because I think we're both on the same page is that we don't want to see those same tragedies that are so easily prevented.
Well said. Trenton, thank you so much for being on the Top Cyber Pro podcast.
Appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much. Excellent conversation.